Setting up CSS in Dreamweaver is a little bit difficult because everything is kind of hidden. All the options that you need to get started really are kind of hard to find unless you know exactly what you're looking for. So for this session, I've set up my root folder in Dreamweaver. I've already gone to the Files panel and hit the Manage Sites and established my root folder. I've got a brand new HTML document that I've just pasted in 5 paragraphs of lorem ipsum. Okay, so I've just got 5 basic paragraphs in here, just a paragraph tags, all it's on there. Haven't even saved yet, so I've literally just established the root folder in the Files panel and pasted in a few paragraphs from ellipsum.com. I'll go ahead and do a file save as because that's generally the first thing you'll do once you've got any content created. I'll save this as my index.html right to my root folder that I just made moments ago before I started the video. And I'm ready to go ahead and apply some CSS to this. Ultimately, I would just like to put maybe a different CSS style on each one of these paragraphs. So we'll start today with a CSS rule for text, and then we'll move right into CSS for div, so really all in the same place. In order to apply CSS, I really need to go make my CSS rule first. So with HTML code, it's kind of a choice. You can do your HTML first and your CSS second, or vice versa. But with Dreamweaver, you really have to make your CSS rule before you can apply it to anything. You can't really just do the HTML portion. So I've already got my paragraphs created. I haven't put any sort of reference in my code to any sort of CSS class, nothing like that. Dreamweaver will do all of that for me. So we're going to go over to your CSS Styles panel. It says CSS Styles. If you don't see it over here on the right side of the screen, you can go up to Window and go down to CSS Styles. Should be third one down. And open that panel up. Then click on the word All. There's All or Current. Current doesn't help us out much, so let's go to All. And the way that this panel works, this will be a list of all of our CSS selectors. So we might have para 1, para 2, para 3, we might have container, header, nav, column 1, etc. So this is just simply a list. When you click on any of these, down here you'll see a list of its properties. So for example, if I've got container highlighted up here, I'll probably see something like margin of auto, width of 955, overflow of hidden, etc. And Dreamweaver is all about these pop-up boxes, so we're going to see a lot of options here in just a few moments. To start, I'm going to click the new CSS Rule button. It almost looks like a new layer button down here on the bottom of the CSS Styles panel. And when I click that, it gives me this pop-up box that's got several choices for it. First of all, the selector type. Remember, the selector is the name of your CSS rule. You can do a class, an ID, a tag, or compound. Don't worry about compound at all. That's really just like doing 2 or more classes at the same time or 2 or more tags at the same time, which I don't think you'll need to do. Generally, you'll use class for just about everything. You can do an ID if it's only 1 per page, like a container or a header. So I'm just simply going to leave it class. I'm going to call this, where it says selector name, I'll come down here and type in .para1. Now you can name this anything you want. Just remember, if it's a class, it starts with a dot. Needs to start with a letter after that. You can't start it with a number, and no spaces. So .para1 makes a lot of sense. This big box here, which is kind of intimidating, that looks like we're supposed to type a bunch of stuff, it's nothing at all. It actually is just something that's trying to tell you what you're doing up here. So I wish they would just get rid of this because it's kind of intimidating. The last box is where we'd like to define this CSS rule. Our choices are this document only or new style sheet file. Now the first time around, with the first CSS rule that we're going to make, the process is a little bit different. It gets easier and shorter from the second, third, fourth time thereafter. So the first time around only, we're going to choose new style sheet file. We'd like to put all of our CSS in an external style sheet, so that's what that's talking about. So normally when you hit OK, it'll take you to a new dialog box where you're going to be able to choose what CSS properties and values you want. But the first time around, it's a little different. the first time around, it prompts me to save my CSS file. Remember, Dreamweaver always wants to save first. We do our root folder first, we do a save as our HTML first, and before we can go on creating our first CSS rule, we have to save the CSS file first. So that makes sense, but this little save style sheet file as only comes up the first time. I'm just simply going to call it style.css, and it should put the .css on there for you if you forget, but I'll hit save. Then it takes me to this dialog box where I can then start to pick and choose what CSS properties I want. Now I would love to go through each and every property and value on this list, but there's lots of them. There's more than 100 of these properties and values. They're broken down by category, but essentially this is a list of just about all of the CSS properties that there are at the moment. Type, for example, gives you all of your typography properties. Here's our fonts, here's our size, our colors down here. So that's really all I'm going to change. I'll change it to one of these common fonts that are already listed. I'll choose Verdana. I'll make the font size on this 18 and the color, I'll do some sort of green just so I can see it. This won't be very pretty, but it'll just be something that I can obviously see a change in. There are other choices here. You're welcome to go through them. Font weight, for example, has bold, bolder, lighter, and then 9 different levels of bold. Please note, most of these don't work for most fonts. There are some fonts that have different levels of bold, but for the most part, bold is the one that's going to make your font thicker. So some of these properties don't work for every font. And it'll be the same way throughout all these categories. Some of these options are going to work great. Some of them won't work in certain browsers and so on. But it's just all about experimentation and trial and error on this. One other example that I'll give you, the one called blink. It makes your text blink. And first of all, from a design standpoint, don't do it. No one likes blinking text. You can't read it unless you're on, MySpace in the early 2000s. You just don't want blinking text. But that's one of the examples that just doesn't work in every browser. So you are certainly welcome to choose blink. Go check it out in Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera, whatever else you'd like to try it in, and do a little compare and contrast. But to me, if it doesn't work in all the browsers, if it's not consistent, I'm going to avoid it. I don't want inconsistencies across my design. But that's just a simple example. So I've changed 3 things here: font family, font size, and color. I'm going to hit OK. And now if I glance up here at my CSS Styles panel, I see that there's sort of a drop-down menu. It says style.css, and so far there's one thing under it, which is para 1. Now if you want to come back and edit your CSS rule, you can do that a couple different ways. The easiest way, I think, is to just come back up here to para 1 and double-click it. It pulls this box right back up, and you can go in and change anything and everything that you want. The second way to change or edit a CSS rule is to click on it, come down here, and you can actually click in any of these and change things here, either from a drop-down menu or maybe you can type something in, or you can hit the Add Property, and it gives you all of the CSS properties as one big giant drop-down list. So I'd mentioned there's well over 100 of these. I've never actually counted. I would say there's probably closer to 200. So you can look through all these and see what sort of CSS properties there are, but many of them are in groups. If you're on an older version of Dreamweaver, you might not see everything here. Transitions, for example, these are new CSS3 animations. You won't see them in any other version of Dreamweaver but CS6 or the Creative Cloud. So there's several font options or several drop and column. Many of these are brand new for CSS3, so you might not see everything here. Many of them for background. So I've created my CSS rule. That's sort of like phase 1 of this. Phase 2 is applying that CSS rule to some HTML element. And that's the easy part, incredibly easy. Watch this. I'm simply going to highlight my first paragraph. I'm going to come down here to the Properties bar at the very bottom of the screen, and there should be a little drop-down menu that says Class. When you hit the drop-down next to Class, you'll see a list of all of your CSS rules, at which point you can click on Para 1, and there you go, bam, it's all done. Now, because this is a CSS rule, you can reuse it as many times as you want. So if I decided, hey, I'd like to come down here and click on this third paragraph and also make that this green Para 1, I can do that. You can do it as often as you want. So maybe I'll do the fifth paragraph the same. I'll just highlight it, come down here to Properties at the bottom of the screen and choose Class, Para 1, and there you go. So very, very easy to do that. So CSS for text, not too bad. Not too bad. When we start applying CSS to divs, however, it gets a little bit more difficult because there's more options that we need, and we're gonna have to look through that big, massive CSS list or the pop-up menu that comes up. So what I'd like to do next, well, first of all, let's go ahead and save this. And here's what I would consider a kind of a problem with Dreamweaver and CSS at this point. If I save this and go take a look at this in a web browser, so for example, if I preview this in Safari, it'll come up and say some files needed to accurately preview this page have been modified but not saved. Would you like to save them now? Now, yes is fine, but I just literally saved my file. I just did Control S or Command S on my keyboard, so I know that this file is saved. I'll hit No real quick and just kind of glance up here. And I want you to see that up here on the very top left-hand corner of your Dreamweaver, right above where it says Code Split and Design, I see, well, it's going to preview it anyways. I see source code, which is my HTML, and I see style.css, and it has a little asterisk by it. That little asterisk in any Adobe program means that that's a file that hasn't been saved. So Control S or Command S on your keyboard is a great shortcut to know because it saves, but it only saves the file you're currently working on. If you are working on two files at once, and we're working on an HTML and a CSS, it doesn't save them both, and that's kind of a problem. Now if I jump over to that style.css and simply do a Command S or Control S and save it, then my preview should work correctly. I can then go preview it. Notice when I previewed it a moment ago, even though I hit don't save, it still previewed. None of my CSS is working. But the moment that I refresh it after I've saved the CSS, everything should. So it's kind of a weird thing. I'm not a real big fan of the fact that Control S doesn't save everything, it just saves the one thing. Now there is a little bit of a solution to that. You can go up to File and Save All. Save All is it will save everything that's open, even multiple HTML tabs, your CSS files, etc. So Save All is nice. Notice from the menu up here though, there is no shortcut for that. So you literally have to go to File, Save All. You could also go to View, Toolbars, and Standard. View, Toolbars, and Standard. That puts a new toolbar up here on the top of your Dreamweaver, and about the fifth or sixth button over, looks like the fifth button over, there's a button that says Save All. It actually looks like two floppy disks, because nothing says saving cutting edge web design like an icon, a floppy disk. I have no idea why they haven't changed their icon since the 90s, but you've got this little icon here that says Save All. You can come up here and click that instead of going to File, Save All. I think under Edit and Preferences or Dreamweaver Preferences, you can also establish your own hotkeys. So if you want to make up your own shortcut to do Save All, you can do that. But that's something it takes a few times to really remember, that you're going to have to go to File, Save All or something to do that. So if you're previewing it in Dreamweaver, it looks fine, and you're previewing a browser and it doesn't, then make sure you're saving all. It's a very easy mistake to make. And very easy to correct, I should say. So that's kind of that. Let's move on to creating CSS for our divs. Now I could create a div and put around this I could do that in my code, or I could do it here in Dreamweaver. And since I'm just kind of showing this the first time, I'm actually going to delete all these paragraphs. It would be easier for me if I just didn't have anything to look at. So, the theory is we make our CSS first and our HTML second. So I'm not going to insert a div tag. I'm going to go straight and make my CSS rule for it first. Then I'll insert a div tag, and I'll show how to do that. Let's go make the new CSS rule. Click on the new CSS rule button. I'm going to call this .container. It's a class .container. Notice this next time around, I don't have to say new style sheet file. Down here at the bottom, it automatically found style.css, so I don't have to do anything there. It's already done. So I'll hit OK. Now, I know that there are 4 properties I'm going to need for my container. Under the background category, I'll give it a background color. And I've got this nice color picker so I can choose any color I want. And you've got all these other background choices about background image, background repeats. We've looked at those in code already before. So there's lots of other choices. I'm going to go down to the box category, and I'll give this 2 properties on this screen. I'm going to give it a width of 955. And down here where it says margin, here's my padding and margins that I can play with. I'm going to choose this little drop-down menu and put auto, margin of auto. Now notice it says same for all, and it's whenever I choose auto on the top, it puts it on all 4. That's because of that checkbox there. Same for padding. You'll need that later. So whenever I do same for all, it puts a margin of auto, which I know I need. The last option I need is under positioning, and it's overflow of hidden. Overflow of hidden. Those 4 properties always go on a container or whatever I'm calling my div that's going around everything. I'll then say OK. Then I'll need to go up to my insert menu. And this is kind of a weird thing because after we hit OK, we're like, hey, where'd it go? I don't see my container. I haven't actually made the div yet. I've only made the CSS for it. So it's normal that you don't see anything happen. We have to go up to the insert panel at the top of the screen. You might have to click that a time or two. You're going to look for the one called Insert Div Tag. If you remember where Insert Image or Images were, then you can go right above that, Insert Div Tag. Again, it's kind of weird. There's a lot of weird things about Dreamweaver. I don't know why the word Insert is there. I'm on the Insert panel. Nothing else says Insert. It doesn't say Insert Hyperlink or Insert Table or Insert Image. It looks to me like I should just say Div Tag here, but it says Insert Div Tag, so that's okay. We'll deal with that. When you hit Insert Div Tag, of course another box pops up, and it wants to know what we'd like to put on this div tag, a class or an ID. If I drop down that class menu, it shows me a list of all my CSS classes that I've made. So I can choose container, and that's how it links up my CSS to my div. I can then hit OK, and there it is. It drops in a container. Now my resolution is really small, so it looks very wide, but it is correct. It's yellow. If I do a file save all real quick and look at this in my browser again, I should be able to expand that browser and see that that is definitely centered in the middle of my screen, and it is. So all that worked fine. So making CSS for a div really isn't that much more difficult than doing it for text. The problem is when you do it for text, let's make another one here. I'm going to make one called col1, COL1 for column 1. The difference is when you do it for text, all the options are really right here on one screen. You can go to the block category. That includes more text options as well. But when you're working with divs, you got to bounce around on this category list over here, and I think that's what makes it kind of difficult to figure out. So maybe I'll put on a background color on this, and again, this is going to be a column. I'm going to go to the box category and tell it what width it should be. I'm going to make this one 500, and that's also where I'll find float, that incredibly important float. So I'll float this to the left with the impression that I'll float things next to it later. You can play with borders. There's borders there. You can play with positioning, although that gets kind of difficult. But for the most part, the options we've looked at already are the ones you're really going to need. That doesn't change just because of Dreamweaver. So I'm going to hit OK on that. And let's say that I want to put my first column under this text. So I'll just click Enter to put a new paragraph tag. And I'll go to my Insert panel, Insert Div Tag. My class will be column 1. And OK. And there it is. Now it always puts a sentence in there, a statement that says content for class, whatever the class is, goes here. It just gives you a placeholder so that you can come in there and hit enter. You can paste your paragraphs, your content. It just gives you a place to see what's going on. I'll do one more here. I'll do a second column so at least we can see how things line up. I'll make a new CSS rule. I'm going to make sure it says class. And this will change according to what you've got highlighted there in Dreamweaver. So don't dwell on the fact that it kind of keeps changing. Just make sure it says class. I'm going to type .col2, C-O-L-2 for column 2. And it says style.css at the bottom. And I'll give it the same properties. I'll give it a background color of something that I can see. I'll give it a box category. It was 955. I did this first one at 500, so this one will be 455. Assuming I'm only going to have 2. I'll give this one a float right. And I'm going to hit OK. Now I need to get my cursor in the right spot, and this is where code really comes in handy. Because sometimes it's really, really difficult to get your cursor just into the right spot. So I'm going to get my cursor just over here to the right of that first column. I can kind of see it blinking there. If you can't, go to code view. Make sure you're outside of your column 1 div. So there's my column 1. So I'm going to make sure my mouse is right out here. I'll go to Insert Div Tag, column 2. OK, and there it is. And I'll just hit enter and just pretend like I'm putting in a bunch of text. Remember, you got to do save all, and then you can go look at it in your browser. And there you go. So it's not pretty by any means, but technically speaking, it's how you get divs in and how you can get things lined up in there. So just all about learning the tools. The last thought I'll leave you with for this session is a fairly simple one. Always, always, always look at this in a browser. I cannot stress that enough. There will be times when things aren't lining up in Dreamweaver. It's unknown why. It's always been that way, probably always will be. But you'll be looking at your divs and your layout in Dreamweaver, and you'll be going crazy because you can't figure out why things won't line up. And the truth is, it does work. It works fine in all the browsers, but Dreamweaver just sometimes gives you a strange-looking view of that. So don't dwell on the fact that things look different in Dreamweaver. That's why the preview and browser button's there, because Dreamweaver is not a browser. It will look different there. So always, always, always look at it in at least one browser, if not 3 or 4. So hopefully that helps you out. If you need things this week, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. Hope your projects are going well, and we're getting close to wrapping this thing up. So good luck with everything, and we'll talk to you next week.